Hi, I'm Seamless, and because I felt like it, it's time for a new how to bass tutorial. And today, I'm going to show you how to make this sound. This is a completely contained vinyl preset. Not only is it contained, but just about everything you're seeing here is the depth of what the effect is. It has the dopest directly available unison settings I've seen in a fixed environment. It has productivity power that Faceplant does, but without the benefit of having the modular interface, and it still delivers. It's not even that big a deal to use. I'm quite and super so far impressed with this, and I have literally barely scratched the surface. And the surface is way better than I remember it being, because the whole point I was excited about this plugin in the first place was what you can do below the surface, and I didn't even do anything of that in this video. So we'll talk about that when we do something with those in future how to basses. Isn't that something fun to say? Anyway, this sound. Unison is the name of the game. There's 4 voices of unison on both of these oscillators. However, only this one has levels coming out directly. This one is a modulator, as set by this. Each oscillator has whatever's going on in its generation, which is usually a table, because it can be a table. Or there's also the sample lane. I wonder if you could put a sample in the thing. But point is, oscillators, these were just saw waves. I changed nothing about the initial state other than to mess with this stuff. This is the harmonic. So here's our spectral morpher, and here's our distortion. That's what it calls itself in here. Spect and distortion. Spect and distortion. And there's also a bunch of effects in there, but we'll get there too. Actually, let's work backwards, shall we? On top here is a filter that's just calling off the top end because it's just a bit high. Didn't seem like much, but in a mix that would matter. And then after that, there's this distortion that I'm using is just a limit, because I did pork some of this up and down a bit, and there's no limit on it. So I figure limit. And then here is multi-band compressor, multi-band compressing, and this is an interesting take on a multi-band compressor interface. There's a bottom threshold and a top threshold, and it's essentially like you're visually identifying where you're crunching down your dynamic range to, and that's kind of great. It's not a neat way to approach it. And then it gives you the speed controls, and I'm actually modulating them. This is something I talk about a lot in the viewer track reviews about caring about your speed of compression, because sometimes over compression is not a question of how hard you're pushing it or how far you're pushing it, but how fast it moves. Usually it's too slow, and though the solution to make it too fast is not usually a one-size-fits-all thing. There's usually a consideration for there needs to be a moment where it's dark and it's nice, and a moment where it's high frequency and loud. And in this case of a modulation kind of macro moment where there's a 0 and there's a 100, you can define those moments. And in this case, that's what I did. I have so it goes faster when it's higher on the open end, and it's slower when it's down in the darker end, so that it doesn't burn up the stuff that doesn't need to be burned up. And then before that, rather, is just this reverb. I actually put this after this, but it did sound great post, and I felt like it sounded better compressed. This is also a cool take on a reverb, just straight up splitting it into 2 different low and a high deal, which is kind of just what you need in a reverb thing. Most of the time, a reverb unit is either good or bad based on how well it's able to just be a complicated version of itself. Because really, quote unquote, good reverb is very rarely a question of like killer algorithmic processing on a direct, straight kind of deal. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's just like it's just a question of delay. There's the one lane of reverb, but if you do it like 4 or 5 times with different settings, it sounds pesh. And that's cool that there's basically a kind of straight up, there's 2 of them ready to go. Neat. And without all of it, this is the sound. I didn't even bother to make a separate sub for this, but and honestly, I'm not 100% sure I need to. I probably do, and I probably have to do that in post. There's a direct out option here in the processes, which is kind of nice. So this is cool because this is an out lane for anything, not just one thing. That could be one item, kind of like how Faceplant does. It has lanes internally. So that's how that kind of worked out. I don't even have the filters on. I didn't even use the main filters. I haven't even seen what those options are. I'm sure they're great. And this is reminding me a lot about what it was like when I first finally figured out how to use Citrus, where I just got all of my harmonic motion out of the process, out of FM. And this is like that, because I am using FM, but it's also just like, you'll see what I mean in a second. So the tail end of this is I'm FMing this with this number 2 oscillator here, which has 4 voices in unison, which are spread differently from the voices, the 4 voices here. Now, you can't really make it a voice per voice kind of FM experience, because what if you have odd numbered or even numbered voice counts? I'm not 100% sure if this works out math-wise, but what I'm pretty sure is happening here is that it's just some left and right FMing some left and right. And that's enough. And I honestly don't know if the math would be different if it was voice to voice. I'm pretty sure it could be, but if you had odd number of voice counts, then what are you gonna do? Without the voice counting, this is what this whole setup sounds like. Because remember, not only is there unison happening that's doing detuning and the coolness that's all about, I also have turned off phase randomness almost completely and have manually chosen where the phase is. That's what these 2 parameters are: phase randomness, phase position in degrees. I am doing the whole unison spread thing. So this thing's value is spread in the unison, and this thing's value is spread in the unison, and this thing's value is spread in the unison. And all of that coming together is forming this nice dense pillow of modulation, and it's all moving together flawlessly. That's something I like about this plugin. Like, a lot of plugins can let you plug in a lot of stuff, but you just move a knob and there's just a lag. And it's because, yeah, it had to. A lot of this stuff is dangerous. This is dangerous stuff, like Nyquist relationship. And like Faceplant, you just have to plan for your development to include for this. A lot of plugins will have neat tricks like the band limiting inside Citrus and whatnot, but that wasn't something that was designed to be live. If you pitch shift the Citrus down with the band limited played note on a high frequency, you'll see that just the cap of the frequency come down with it. It won't actually fill in the end. But a DSP based, like, from the beginning, remembering you're going to do this, will have a change that says, yes, when you go down lower pitch, put in those harmonics that would be there if you had played that note. And a lot of that, you just had the same thing with these higher, like, much crazier spectral processors that you just are able to FM, because FMing things is instant, like, horror town if you aren't prepared to handle, like, the math on it. And for a long time, the limitation was CPU and whatnot, so a lot of the older plugins weren't designed to operate at a speed that would net your ability to move things that fast, that sharply. New stuff is. This plugin is, and I quite enjoy that. So what's actually happening after we take off our second oscillator? That's what harmonic stretch is doing. And you can sort of see kind of, I don't know if you really, how representative of a visual result that is. The visuals on this are quite killer. All right, yeah. It's not a wavetable, so it doesn't do anything, but whoa. Gotta love the options. So when I was choosing the range and depth of this particular modulation, I was listening to this result with this on it. And also with this configuration is where I made some choices on phase. And then I made more choices once I got to the distorted and compressed version. In fact, that's where I began the choice. Once I had this stuff on, once I was like, okay. The fact that this was originally that's why it's important for the phase to be where you put it and not just let it kind of go, because that texture of it being aligned is because of it being aligned. You didn't know that. If you didn't already know that, you might not know that like this being all together or not, that there is a large enough point that identifies the hardest and sharpest position is a factor of the phases of these voices being aligned together to not cancel to something else, some other shape. So togetherness is required for that to still have that kind of bite to it. So far, that's what I got out of this. And the most impressive thing so far is being able to do this, like, this is essentially a 3 oscillator thing I'm doing right here. Oscillator 2 to FM here, but also a filter on oscillator 2. This would be a whole unit if I were doing this in Faceplant, and this would be a whole unit in real life if I were doing this with a filter. And now it's essentially a baked-in modulatable generation of the band limit concept. And I have a feeling that that's how, like, the math about how far and hard it can calculate what it's doing is really about how hard and down far this went. How much about the calculation is good seems to be the point of this particular plugin. And this is also a very high level exercise in having UI access to that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to diving into the finished version of this because it is super cool. Anyway, I haven't saved this preset yet, but when I do, it'll be in the download to be downloaded in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.